Underway. Councillor Hope is just checking the outside world and will be with us.
Does that mean we have to go easy?
It's.
I'm ready to stop sharing.
Hey.
I'm ready to stop.
Right.
Whenever you're ready. So.
We're just getting technology underway and we're just waiting one moment for Councillor Hope and then we'll get underway.
Yeah.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Kate.
Morning, Councillor Wilson. Morning, Councillor. Oh, that's Councillor Deaker.
Nice to see him.
Looking very good.
Thank you.
Good morning all and welcome to our Finance Committee meeting for the 24th of November. Welcome to our colleagues on Zoom and welcome to everyone else throughout the nation and the world, no doubt, that's listening to our broadcast. So let's get just a slight housekeeping issue. Just if you could please make sure that you're on mute when you're not talking. That's so the rest of the world can't hear our whispers between councillors or our shufflings of papers or our crackling of chips or whatever we're doing. So just if you could please do that, would be very much appreciated. Just moving on to one, we have had no apologies for today, although on attendance by Zoom, we do note that we have Councillor Deakin and Councillor Wilson on Zoom. That's why they're not in the chamber. We've had no request for our public forum. And we are confirming the agenda as is. So if I could just have someone move that in that way. Councillor Hope, secondly Councillor Calvert, those in favour. Aye. Conflicts of interest. I have to remember there's voices coming from above me. I just remind all councillors the need to use their best judgment when relating to matters of conflicts of interest and use the options available to you, which would be really good. So item 5.1, we have the minutes of and 5.2. A second for those minutes. Councillor Noon. Those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Carried. And then we move to our actions register. And is there anything that needs to be brought to our attention by councillors there or staff? We're comfortable. Nothing from you, Mrs. Gardner. So we then will move to matters for consideration, which is our first item is 7.1, our quarterly report, who we will have Jasmine and Mr. Donnelly come forward. It's in exceptionally big font. I better put that down. I must be reading it quite late.
Meant to choose a first name for somebody and a Mr. Donnelly for the other one, did you?
No, I did really.
You just didn't know the name?
Yeah. Just before I hand over to staff, I just want to make a couple of notes before we get underway with our quarterly report. So this is the Council Activity and Performance Report for the first quarter of the 2021-22 financial year. It's also the first quarter report of our 2021-31 long-term plan. And we will recall that for the 2021-22 year, Council agreed to in excess of a 48% rate increase to ensure that the ORC was fit for purpose in today's world and resourced to ensure that our staff could deliver our appropriate business plans. That rate increase was also essential to deliver the ORC that our ratepayers have requested of us. So it's our first quarterly report and our first opportunity to really test our accountability. Are we delivering what we've promised? Are we spending where we should be? And quite simply, are we on target? Our auditors and our audit report have expressed considerable concern about ongoing budget deficits. Our CE has reminded us that it is a joint effort between staff and governance to manage spending and observe our work programs in order to avoid ongoing budget deficits. Quite simply, at some stage, we need to balance our books and ensure that they are balanced. We have one recommendation, is to receive this report, but first I'll go to Nick and Jasmine to introduce this topic, and then we'll have question time. Nick.
Thanks. That was quite a good summary. As you pointed out, this is the first quarter of the year. So this report is the activity report. It does include some financial information as well, but there is the more detailed financial report to follow. So just noting, but on the point of the measures and targets in particular, which is really the primary focus of this report, because it's the first quarter, a lot of them we're indicating at this point whether they're on track or not. Obviously, that we're not expecting them to have been achieved in the first quarter. It's more indicating where these are likely to be at the end of the year, and particularly indicate whether anything already early in the year is deviating from where we'd expect it. So that's the primary purpose of this, early in the year, is to see where things are heading. So Jasmine can probably give just a little bit of an overview of that, just to summarise what's there, because that's probably the key thing. And there's when you have a look at that, it does show, the majority of them are obviously on track at this point, as we'd expect. Just the other point around budget deficits. Obviously, that was the case last year when there was a lot of activity that was agreed to through the year. We already had last year a deficit planned anyway. Then there was other work that was agreed to as the year was underway. So that led to a bigger deficit than was planned. This year, as you'll see in the financial side of it, there's actually a surplus for the first quarter because, of course, part of last year's issue was there was a lot of unbudgeted activity that got brought onto the books after the budget had been set. So we're seeing a different scenario this year, in that it's a surplus that we're seeing at the end of this first quarter. Now, the majority of that, there is work that's underway that will pick up. There's some timing in there as well. But as Councillor Malcolm pointed out, we had a 48% rate increase. So that means that we haven't got the same issue as last year when we didn't have the budget to do the things that needed to be done. But as he pointed out, there's still the requirement to balance the books, whether it's a surplus or a deficit. So obviously 3 months in, it's very early days, and a lot of that work is still expected to get caught up. But it is something to watch out for, and probably even more so when you get the next quarterly report, when there'll be a much better indication of how we're tracking financially after a bit longer period. But I don't know, Jasmine, if you've got anything you wanted to add on the actual report itself.
I was just going to point out there's 64 targets for this year. There's across the LTP, we've got 72 targets by year 3. This year, there's 64 targets relating to activity, 50 are on track. There's 6 which have indicated that they're not currently on track, or performance may not be as we would expect. That's largely related to COVID or to staffing vacancies, staff moving or not yet on board. There's 2 which haven't been achieved. Those relate to response times. The Lagoima one's an ongoing issue. We've still got a very high response rate. There was only one response outside of that time frame, and the other one is a response relating to river management and staff were working on higher priority, higher risk priorities. So there were two responses that were outside of the timeframes there. I guess I'll leave it for questions if there's anything further.
I've got a few questions, but they come in sort of groups in different areas, so perhaps I'll leave some of them as we move through the.
If there is a
Yeah.
particular page that you need
Yes.
for us to
Yes.
it would also be helpful.
Right. Well, my first question is page 13, the transport. We know that there's some effects of public transport in Queenstown that are to do with COVID, but the transport revenue and the transport spending are all quite different than we predicted. I would like to know what it's likely to be at the end of the year. I mean, that first quarter is but what it seems to be, and it's in later bits too, is that the use of public transport is not generally going up. It went up when it was free for a while, and it's a wee bit up from what it was, and it's down in Queenstown from COVID and things, but generally it isn't changing much, it's just going slightly up. So what I'd like to know is what we are predicting for the end of the year, whether that's what financial and other position would be in about it.
So you said page 13, so that's page 13 of the agenda. So, and that's the point in.
And there's other later, but.
Yeah, but is that and that's the point in paragraph 14.
Yes.
And 15. Yeah. So the revenue in paragraph 14. Yeah. I think there will be. We'll need to bring some more detail back to council on that. You got to remember this was the first quarter, so this includes the COVID lockdown period. So the budget did factor in that for year one that we expected patronage and fare revenue to be lower in particularly in Queenstown due to COVID and the tourists not coming back. But then what we've seen here in Q1 obviously is revenue that is even lower because of course you go into lockdown and everybody stops moving around and doing anything. So we just need to, that is one of those ones at this point we haven't done a forecast on where we'll be, but we expect that when we do the Q2 result, we'll look at the forecast and where we think that will be. But based on where transport is at, is anything that you've got where you've got an underspend or an under recovery of revenue like you have for a period, we're not going to catch that up in the current environment. So we will continue to be down on revenue year to date and by year end because there's no way that that's going to catch up because patronage is not going to increase over and above to offset that.
Yes, so what I'm thinking there is that it will be likely to be a budgetary overspend right the way through till the end of the year. And we've made some predictions in the long-term plan about where it's going and for next year. And is it that we need to revisit those guesstimates? There's
two parts to it. If you look in para 15, in transport, it's actually underspent. There's an underspend in transport. Part of that is around some of the assumptions that I think the ferry service was going to be up and running and different things like that. So there is an underspend, but the one that's being impacted by COVID and patronage is the revenue. We will be looking at that. Obviously, 3 months in, it's is a little bit early to work out where we're going to be for the full year. For the half year, when we present the half year result, we'll look at the forecast going forward on where we'd be with that. and what the implications of that might be, because obviously, there's still the impact of $2 fares are in there as well. So whether that's whether there'll be some changes to that or whether that continues. So we have to factor all those things in. So the simple answer is we need to do some more work on it. And the next quarterly with half year actual, and we'll have a much better view on where the full year's landing, will be the time to do that.
It's just because we're also being asked to look at the budget for next year. And if we're looking for the budget for next year, we should perhaps just revisit the whole where we're going with that. If there's new assumptions we need to make.
Yeah,
and that there'll be an overspend, because otherwise we could find ourselves agreeing that this is the budget for next year is not a significant material. I think whatever would change from the long-term plan, and so it's not of significance, but it might actually contain budgetary overspends and things that we could have made different assumptions about now. I'm just sort of a bit concerned that we're not taking those in for next year.
We do. We do. When we re-look at the annual plan, that's one of the things is we look at those assumptions around fare revenue, and we'll adjust them if we need to. But you can't. It's difficult to take into account of what may or may not happen around people being able to move or not. We could see the opposite. If depending on how things open up, there could be bus revenue in Queenstown could actually come in ahead of where we're expecting. But the key thing here is what we've got here in the first quarter already is we've got an underspend. We haven't got an overspend, but we've got a bigger under recovery in fares. Yeah, so that overall we're creating a bigger deficit than what we were expecting, and but it's being driven by less fare revenue rather than increased spending. So we do factor those into the annual plan when we're going through that thinking, because obviously that's part of it. The more accurate we can get around the assumptions, the more accurate the annual plan will be for next year.
So at the end of quarter two, that will enable you to then give a better forecast going forward.
I think we'll probably get back to that if we're looking at the next year's annual plan as to whether we need something else.
Through the chair, I understand that the underspend in science is largely related to contracts that are under negotiation but not yet finalised, and that there's confidence that spend will happen, that will catch up on the current underspend. I don't know if Nick or Gwyneth want to add anything.
Yeah, so it's actually contracts we've signed but not necessarily raised a purchase order against, so they don't appear necessarily in the finance system. So there's a significant hundreds of thousands related to that. Most of that underspend can be attributed to that at this stage. Yeah.
We're confident we're generally on track.
Yeah, in terms of the land and water program, yes.
I can leave it till other people. Yeah, okay. One tiny thing and one bigger thing. On page 24, this PM 2.5, which I don't understand at all. It doesn't matter that I don't understand it, but I think it's on page 24, it suggests that there's 5 sites that we're monitoring and that 74% of them are doing something. How would you get 74% from 5 sites? Have I lost something there? I might not understand what's in front of me.
I might have to go back because I know that we're upgrading sites. I'm not sure we might have multiple instruments at a site because we've got 2 instruments operating in parallel as we make upgrades. I'll have to come back to you on that one.
That'd be lovely. It's not of significance. I just thought that perhaps I was confusing.
PM2 is particle matter 2.5. So that's what we're measuring for air quality. Yep.
Thank you. And one just general thought. There are some parts here, almost all of these say we're on task for our work program, which is very encouraging. In some parts, clearly the reason why we have an underspend is that we haven't yet awarded contracts or we haven't whatever. Some of them, however, seem to involve staff vacancies, which will never be caught up. If we're on track with a work program and we haven't had a staff member doing that role for 6 months, then it seems to me that that 6 months is an underspend that will always be underspent. And for example, if you have a monitoring staff member who isn't there, are we going to monitor them twice a week next week? If we didn't monitor them at all this week because we didn't have a staff member? So all I'm saying is that some of these staff vacancies which produce an underspend seem to me will be not a permanent underspend for the future, but that underspend for this quarter will never be needed. Is that, have I missed a point there, or is that likely?
Well, I think it depends. It's always difficult when you're looking at these things in isolation. So, for example, if you're looking at vacancies that aren't filled and the underspend from that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the work isn't being done. It might be being done by the use of a contractor, for example, and that would show in a different part of the budget. So you can't always assume that just because we have a vacancy that the work is not being done. Having said that, you're correct in that there will be an element of some of the vacancies that have been either difficult to fill or where we're waiting for people to start. And I think I talk about that a little bit in my report today, where, yes, there is a bit of a gap.
So it would be sort of useful to tease out at some point, and it doesn't need to be today, where those are, because I appreciate that occasionally there'll be things where people have just worked twice as hard and it's not fair on them actually, but they've achieved the thing we wanted them to achieve without that staff member. There is still an underspend, however, and that money is still money that will never be spent. And very occasionally it will be something, it might be, I can imagine that people haven't had holidays and when they get more people on board, they will have holidays or something. So I can imagine, but I would like a bit of a rundown somewhere on which of these are actually underspends that will never be spent, as it were, because that's money that is appropriate for council to decide if they would want to reprioritise something or help a work program that hasn't been perhaps funded as well or something. I'm just sort of, or it may be that it's appropriate to have some of that money that will never be spent. It could be that it belongs in the bring forward a program that we had for later that we desperately wanted but we didn't have the money for, or whatever it is, or rating people less, or, I'm just saying that I would quite like to know where those fit in.
So it's probably, I understand what you're asking for. It's not quite as simple as that, because just because you've got a vacancy now after 3 months, some of those positions over the first 3 months, they're the ones that are being recruited. So, literally this was up to September and October. We've actually had, just in the last few weeks, we've had a huge amount of people being onboarded. So that's getting caught up. But what will also happen is it's not quite, you can't, if you like, even when we get to the 6 month, just because there's an underspend, say, in staff costs due to vacancies for the first 6 months, that doesn't mean that that money won't get spent in that same area to get that work done, because although the staff cost isn't actually going to get caught up, because you can't, the only way you could catch up the staff cost would be to hire an extra person to put it in there. But because, let's say, we didn't have somebody on board for 6 months that we thought we were going to have, in order to meet that target and get the work done by year end, we might bring a consultant or a contractor in the last 6 months of the year to make sure that the work gets across the line. So at any point, like 3 months in now, or 6 months, or even 9 months, just to say, there's an underspend and we're going to bank that and keep it, that doesn't mean that we're not going to actually spend that money in that same area to get that same work done by year end. And that's what we're managing all the time on a day-to-day basis. Now, so just seeing the variances isn't necessarily going to tell you that. It's about what the story is behind that. And there will be some areas where, people might actually put their hand up and say, we've been underspent and we don't need that money, but we have to go through the forecast process to identify those. It's not as simple as just saying there's an underspend, so I can bank that as for use elsewhere, because it's very likely that to get that work done, that money will have to get spent, but potentially it'll get spent in, through direct supplies and services rather than a staff cost.
Yeah, I can see that, but I would like just some more over the next period, some more understanding of that, especially because the work programs say they're on track. I can see if they say the work program isn't yet got there because we are getting new staff. When we get the new staff, the work program will catch up in the second quarter or whatever. But these all say our work program is on track. So they're not saying that there's work not being done that. I'm just saying the only information we've got would lead us to believe that the work that should have been done by now has been done by now, and it's been done with fewer staff than we're going to have. So anyway, if we could just get some teasing out of that in the near.
The on track is the view of where it's going to be at year end. So what they're saying is over the first quarter, they've been on track to get, basically what happens in the first quarter in a lot of areas is there's a lot of setting up to deliver through, for the remainder of the year. So from that point of view, a lot of the indication is that, things are on track, because we believe that particular measure and target will be met at year end.
Perhaps we just need the targets then to say something a wee bit different, because all the implications are that they're talking about the performance at the moment, not our prediction of performance. That's sort of
there is a mix, some of them. So if something has not been met, like the Lagoima one, it'll indicate that's the position right now. Already we can say that, but some of the others, some of those measures and targets are they're annual targets. So all we can say is, we believe that we're on track to deliver that annual target.
Councillor Laws.
My understanding of the purpose of this. There is it. Yep. My understanding of the purpose of this paper is to do two things. It's one, to say where are we in the work program this year, and then the second is to identify where we're likely to have budget overruns or budget under expenditure. Is that correct?
Yeah, We've got two reports. We've got the finance report that follows. So between the two of them, they show that. This one's more focused around the actual levels of service and the measures and targets that are associated with that.
But one of the things that is sort of that great imponderable, particularly with regional councils, when you're dealing with things like prosecutions and environment court cases and a variety of other issues related to commissioner appeals, is legal expenses and legal fees. So is there a way of, it's almost an imponderable, you don't know what you're going to spend in any given year. So is there a way of tracking that through the system that's able to be reported to us?
Those sort of variances, they're covered more in the, well, there's a little bit in this report where we can explain the variances, but particularly in the finance report, we try to explain the variances and the spend for that sort of thing. And then there's the activities report that shows the breakdown by activities. So it has the enforcement activity and cost in there. And if we do budget an amount for that type of activity, but as you said, depending on what happens and what we might have to get involved in, and we've had this in previous years, there can be significant overspend. It is tracked through there, and we usually will have commentary on that, definitely in the finance report that follows when those costs are being incurred.
So again, one of the reasons that we're doing this is because, as mentioned by the chairman in his introductory remarks, the auditor has got a bit sniffy with us for having budget blowouts in previous years, but how much of those blowouts in previous years would be related to unbudgeted expenditure around legal costs?
We'd have to go away and
I don't want you to do that.
Because legal costs, I mean, then you say, is this legal costs in relation to prosecutions, or is it legal costs?
The whole quantum.
We usually in the reports that we've given to council previously, two areas that we generally explain in the finance report is in relation to the supplies and services costs is consultants and legal. We give the breakdown of what they were versus budget. So we've explained that. I mean, that's because of the nature of the organisation that we are. When we spend more money than budgeted, usually it's in those two areas. It's in money being spent on consultants and money's being spent on lawyers. And it can be in relation to prosecutions and different things, or it can be in relation to all the planning work that we've got going on. So that's generally where most of our overspend is going to.
And that's good to have on the record, because it's not quite as bad as people might think, that there is an inefficiency financially internally. It's that you've got stuff that you can't really budget for and it just goes boof. So that's cool.
Around the table, just a couple of questions from the chair to page 13, 19 and 34, all on flood protection, drainage and river management. There are won't achieves on that in that category, and it is around not reporting. River management issues were investigated and appropriate action determined and communicated within 20 days. 2 are outside that time frame, were deemed at low risk, and staff were focused on higher risk priorities. Understand that sentiment around that. What in that process, what does actually happen to the person who has reported that issue or that issue? How is that communicated to them, and what are the processes in place so they are aware? Greater risks are given greater priority and that they're not forgotten. So could I have an explanation to that? Thanks, Dr. Palmer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, they would ordinarily be kept updated. In respect of both of those matters, they were closed out, but not in the 20-day time frame. One related to the Fraser River. It was some willows that were at threat of falling into the river. The other was Kaikarai Stream concrete panels near Green Island.
So you're confident that the process and behind, if it wasn't just those two, it would be there's a clear program to keep those people informed.
Well, that's our usual practice. I can look into these particular examples, but our usual practice is to keep people informed. Yes.
Thanks very much. And going to page 29. I'll just flick back to that. Now that we have a comment there that on the RPS, and this is around our underspend for that quarter, and we've said there was a consultant underspend on our regional policy statement. So I presume that will be a particular target area that money will now be reprioritised. So that hasn't been spent. We've budgeted X number of dollars and we haven't used that. So what is the process with that? And does that come back for reconsideration to another area, or is that simply absorbed?
My suspicion about that is there is a phasing issue with the RPS. So as you know, we have the regional policy statement going through its process at the moment to the Freshwater Commission. And in terms of how we've budgeted for that, we just haven't reached the point at which that expenditure kicks in, and I would be very surprised if there is an underspend in that area.
So there may be an underspend at the end of the year, but it'll all be to do with the timing of the hearings panel kicking off, and that expenditure will need to be carried over into the following year because the activity is still going to occur. Yep, but sorry, I didn't pick which page exactly you're referring to, but
it was page 29, just under expenditure. So,
yeah, I as I said, it's probably about phasing. Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but with these, it could be timing, and could just be that we actually haven't received the bills yet. So work could have been going on, and if we haven't received all of the bills, so I would at this point 3 months. You've got to remember this was up until September. I wouldn't be guaranteeing that spend isn't going to catch up.
Yeah, I can also assure you I've signed some contracts recently which will probably spend all that underspend, which probably won't be shown in this quarter. They'll come through in the next quarter.
Yeah, and look, I suppose that's part of the question around is, yes, I've budgeted so much to spend on the RPS, and either we've spent it or haven't spent it, but then we're going to another activity, or is it on the same activity and in fact that part is over budget? So it's just getting that picture that we're actually resourcing you correctly from the start, and if some of these areas are, say for instance, going over, that in fact we're sort of in the loop to help to ensure we are resourcing correctly.
I certainly sit down with my managers every quarter and we look at the budgets and we understand where we're under and overspent and whether or not we need to make adjustments and the like. So yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher.
Move the recommendations.
Is there any further questions? Councillor Calvert, sorry.
Sorry, just one.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Kelleher.
Just one tiddly little question. The Lagoima 100% target, well, I appreciate what it's there for, is described as aspirational. What does that mean in the light of these targets? Are any of the others aspirational? Or is that just what we call something that we're never going to meet? Or
through the chair, the 100% is what is in legislation. We can't aim for less than that.
The law.
However, there are times when we can't make that. So it is what we aim for. It's set in law.
I appreciate that, but in the regulatory consents area, 100% is set in law as well. We don't describe any targets in that area as aspirational.
100% in regulatory.
Within 20 working days.
Oh, right.
So I'm just saying that, if we'd be best to describe something as legislatively required or something rather than aspirational. And if it applies equally to anything that's regulatory. I mean, it makes me feel not quite right to have a target that's said to be aspirational, because that just sort of means, oh, we set it out there. To me, it means we've set something out there, but we never thought we were going to achieve it. And of course, you know, I mean, I'm just thinking targets shouldn't be aspirational in general, but if it's because regulatorily we have to have them as that, then we could describe them that in both regulatory and there. Is that a...
Yeah, very good thought, Councillor Calvin. Probably actually at the long-term plan, when we're setting those targets, is probably the time to actually do that, or even we could probably amend that at annual plan time. But there is quite a difference between if we have to do it, we have to do it, and we are aspiring to achieve that 100. So I suppose it really is a regulatory, but we would need to look at that at setting those parameters at long-term plan or annual plan time.
Even once they're set, we shouldn't be describing them possibly as aspirational.
Yep, cool.
Once they're there is all I guess.
Yep. And I had one further question on page 30 under emerging regulatory emerging issues. And it had been recently reported in numerous articles about consent monitoring and achievements through various regional councils. So key to mind, this is on the compliance site inspections and audits that have slipped behind, and we have COVID there, and we do say we're anticipating meeting targets by the end of the year. I just really want to say, are we confident that that is achievable?
Yeah, at this stage we are, that we'll catch up. So there's a program underway that will get it back on track with what was in the compliance plan that council has approved before this year. So at this stage, as per the report, we're confident we'll still meet that target.
And probably a further question to that, to all directors and to our CE, are we in fact comfortable in general, I don't need you to be too explicit, of delivery of our work plans?
As I always say, we are at this point, but I think we just need to be disciplined and stick to the work program and think about how much more we add on top of that and how much more is possible. So I think that's a thing we need to do in partnership with governors around, if there are other priorities that come up, then what is it that we are going to do to adjust the work program in order to be able to accommodate those.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. And I have a question from Councillor Hope.
Thank you. Mine's on emergency management through the chair. So on page 37 of our emergency management, it's just a query. It's to do with COVID, which all impacts us now. May I read the third bullet point down? Due to staff turnover and reduced availability of training courses due to COVID-19 in brackets, the ECC does not currently have adequate numbers of intermediate level trained staff. Training is planned for December to rectify this. Other levels all have adequate numbers of trained staff available. I just wonder, can someone comment to me on that a little bit further, whether it's you, Mrs. Gardner?
We operate a tier system on level of training from sort of elementary through intermediate to more experienced people. And at the moment we have less than the numbers we would like in the intermediate level. At the moment we have a total of 44 trained staff for our ECC, and our ideal number is 58 to give us 2 shifts of 29. We are capable of operating at the moment.
I might just add to that. The likely responsibilities for COVID are not anticipated to be the same for civil defence as they were in the first lockdown. And so I don't think we necessarily need to be concerned in relation to COVID about our ability to respond. The government has set up regional liaison groups, and it is clear that regional liaison groups and not civil defence will have responsibility for COVID response.
Thank you. I appreciate you clearing it up for me.
No further questions. I have Councillor.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, as I pointed out in the last paper, this paper obviously is very closely linked to the previous one. We do have some commentary in this paper. We've actually, although it's pretty much as it has been in previous finance reports that you've received, there's the Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expenditure, the Statement of Financial Position, which is the balance sheet, Treasury report, and then the more detailed activity report. The cover paper, though, we have added in there on the expenditure, there's a table that just outlines variances. They are done at an activity level where the variance is greater than 100,000 to budget. So with that, we're hoping that sort of gives some commentary around where those where the differences are. Obviously, as we pointed out and just had the discussion, this quarter we're largely or mostly talking about underspends, whereas if we had been doing this sort of table previously, it would have been focused on overspends. But hopefully that sort of shows where the significant variances are. Although having said that, for a lot of them, they are viewed at this point to likely to be timing related, and we're expecting to catch those variances up. But that will be reported further in the subsequent quarterly reports, particularly the next one with a forecast view as well.
Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the additional detail on that page 2 and 3, that table. They're good stuff. My question is on the first page, just under paragraph 5, possibly for Gavin, and just wondering with regards to the subsidies and grant revenue below budget, etc. Then it goes on to say that with regards to the Outram project, slightly behind schedule, received 77k grant income, and just the question around, is that the grant income becomes available when you hit certain milestones with the project, so it doesn't all come in on day one. So as your project progresses, you hit certain targets, then you get the money. Is that how it works?
To you, Mr. Chairman, yes, it's correct. There are quite strict, disciplined project milestones and payment against those milestones. The project's going well overall. It's just a timing issue.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Probably just. Apologies. Apologies. So just noting what we'd already talked about in the previous is about the income well down on public transport. So it's something we need to be mindful of, and how long term really we're going to make this public transport attractive. No doubt a long term goal. So any further questions? Councillor Calvert?
Not a question, but I'd like to move that we...
I have a question then, just if you could hold that thought.
And I just wanted to say, and I don't know whether I want to say how pleased I was at getting this a level of detail. It seems to me a really helpful paper to help us understand and help us make decisions and things. So I just sort of want to commend our staff on the quality of this paper.
Question, Councillor Hope.
Yes, I do. I just also would endorse what Councillor Calvert said. It's a very good paper. This probably is a Dr. Palmer question through the chair, and I'll go to these two people in finance. I just want to be certain the natural hazard LiDAR screening project is delayed, but we know it's coming. And I just want to know, we are confident, are we, that LINZ will stump up the money, that it's looking on track? There's no qualms, no concerns? Sorry, I think it's a Dr. Palmer question. Please.
Yes. In respect to the second question, I don't think we have any concerns about payment from LINZ for the work. And in respect to the first one, yes, those will just be timing issues early in the financial year.
Thank you, Dr.
Yep.
Palmer. Thank you.
Any further questions? Go back to Councillor Calvert and move Councillor Calvert with her endorsement, and Councillor Noon second. Those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. Move to 7.3. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. So, Sarah.
Yeah.
I just don't have to remember too many names, do I?
Yes, Sarah.
Yeah. Welcome, Sarah. And now on to 7.3, which is the rate strike collection, 31st of October 2021. And I'll hand straight to Sarah and Mr. Donnelly to sort that through.
I think this one we could probably take pretty much as read. It's this is a standard update that we do this to this meeting every year at this time of the year after the actual the rates are due at 31 October. So just outlining the percentages that we received on the due date, penalties that were struck, and we also give some information around payment types, so around how much we're receiving electronically. Obviously, this is the first year that we've had that cheques are no longer available. And then the other thing that we've done is we have just added some comments there around East Tyree. So if you remember, we brought a paper to council and we issued a letter to those ratepayers, and a small number did take up the opportunity to look at adjusting, putting a payment arrangement so that they've paid slightly less than invoiced this year, and then that'll flow through into next year's. But it was only a few. Most of them, even some of those that did get in touch after the letter, were happy just to pay as invoiced, acknowledging that when we issue the invoices next year, obviously we'll sort out the over invoiced amount this year. So just thought we'd put that update in for your information as well.
Any questions, Councillor Calvert and Councillor Hope?
When you've got a description here about online payment methods are increasing, is the receiving the demand online, how is that tracking?
Sorry, and what do you mean in terms of the dollar value, or?
I think you mean emailed invoices.
Yeah.
Oh, so in terms of more people are getting their rates notices via email. Yeah. So, and also we've seen a big uptake, nearly 2,000 extra DD people signed up this year. So.
It's the same sort of proportion increase in getting them by email as it is in paying them.
So people
online
well, cheques have gone, so that we had about a 5% group of cheque payers. So our New Zealand Post portion has probably gone slightly up, but then we've had an increase in the DD, and then just online, so whether people set up an automatic payment or a direct credit to RC themselves.
I'm asking, is that there seem to be some things this time round of people who said they hadn't got their rate demand, as I guess there is from time to time anyway. And it's a very unwelcome thought that they receive that they have to ferret them out and make sure they pay them regardless of whether they receive the, whether the dog stole my homework, as it were.
I mean, and that's why we've got options around the penalty waiver and things, and we're reliant on TLAs keeping their information up to date. So it is a point in time. So names and address properties do get sold, but in terms of if the ratepayer lets us know, then we can address that issue and reissue invoices and turn those around pretty quickly. So they're not late in paying. So we do manage that, and if some do slip through the net, then if they get in touch with us, we will accommodate. And certainly if it's change of ownership, penalty waiver, there's no issue about reversing that penalty.
It might be something worth thinking about for our comms people to think when rates are around, what happens that might make you miss them, and
get in touch and get a copy of
just more
yes,
comms around that would be possibly helpful.
Spoken about that, and that's something we're looking to put together a better plan for this following year.
Councillor Hope, then Councillor Laws.
Thank you. Mine's on page 54. You've got a lovely little summary there of a pie chart, but my first one is just going back to those people that actually don't pay up, which is number 6. You talk about when most people have rates overdue by more than 3 months, only make payment once debt collection procedures with the third-party collection agency demand being initiated. Can I understand that? So does that mean they make the one payment, but there's money outstanding, or they?
Sorry, they only make the payment once we involve that third party.
So you put the heavies in, if you like, and then suddenly they squeeze
where possible. I mean, we've had more people contact us around arrangements to pay and things like that. So again, in terms of trying to work with the ratepayer, the triennial DD has been more popular this year than what it was last year, I think, with the increase. So people are using those options as well, and we're trying to, if they are struggling with payment, having that conversation and trying to manage the situation with them before we look at more severe measures.
Thank you, Sarah. And my second question to this, through the chair, your number 10, you've got the pie chart, and there's good old New Zealand Post in the red, small slither of the cheese, but it's still there. Is it up to us? How does it work with New Zealand Post? Is it somebody that we always go to? They're happy to be the recipient, or if you like, of people paying their rates?
So to be honest, I haven't. They were in place, and with checks going, we wanted to make sure that there was another option, especially for some of those ratepayers that weren't as tech savvy. So we've also brought in the BNZ ATM, so we're a preferred option on that. So that's another option. So I know, trying to encourage, again, those people that perhaps using checks, the ATM, they can select the Otago Regional Council, they put in their assessment and pay it that way as well. So New Zealand Post, maintaining them, especially this year, was just to give us another option that people were familiar with checks going.
Can I ask you, doing it this year, but I would be concerned, how will we keep that going?
Certainly at this stage, there's no view to remove it, but I think probably as more and more people come online, it's probably something that you'd look to in the future, whether it's still a viable option.
And I concur with Councillor Calvert, something probably in our comms we need to say that too. I think that's brilliant, and I think that's great that there's some different options. Thank you.
Councillor Laws.
So just to confirm, you have discretion if you come across a particular case where it seems reasonable that there is late payment, not to impose penalties. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes.
Same topic. I just really wondered how confident you were that rate demands are getting to the right people.
I mean, we've had nearly the same proportion paying. Nearly 80% of ratepayers have paid on time. So that's in line with previous years. So in terms of the number of people that we're having to provide invoices to because they're missing, it's a fairly low proportion out of sort of 120,000 plus. Obviously, we can't control the local postie and things like that. So sometimes they don't get them, but certainly the instances that have come about in the media recently, when we've looked, 75% of those ratepayers on those specific roads have actually paid their rates on time. So for whatever reason, and the thing is, they go out September, so people perhaps think, you know what, they're not due to 31st of October, I'll put it to one side, I'll pay it a little bit late. There's a whole raft of reasons that could influence.
So you are confident that the bills are getting to people, and that
I think if we'd seen a dramatic drop in the percentage we collected on time, that would perhaps indicate otherwise. But
and can you look at that in a reasonably bespoke way, like a particular, as you said, a particular road?
So in terms of, I compared the rates notices that went out to the specific address, and then compared that to penalties that were sent to that same street address.
And is there anything that goes wrong when people have more than one property?
It's really hard to tell in terms of, unless you did quite a lot of analysis, whether in terms of, but if they've got the same postal address, and I know the print house do look, they will only send out multiple assessments if it's got exactly the same ratepayer name and exactly the same address. Otherwise, they would go individually.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kelleher, then Councillor Wilson's on standby.
Thank you. Two questions. Just the checks to direct debits or other means. It's actually surprised me that it's been so easy, I suppose, given the number that I would have thought were paying by cheque and the transition for them. So we've been able to be helpful if we've needed to for those people who have had trouble.
Yes, and in terms of, and sometimes it's a case of even a staff member staying on the line, walking someone through on the other end while they fill in their forms. Most feedback we get around the direct debit online form, people find it's pretty easy to use. If it's someone that's got sort of 5 or more properties, they'll perhaps get in touch so they're not having to fill in like 5 forms, and we've got that option. So, and also we've also worked with some of our bigger providers to accommodate them as well if they've got multiple properties.
Thank you. The other one was just around as our rates increase, so the amount that we by and large are paying has proportionally gone up substantially. I guess we would be looking to move more to people who will pay 3 or 4 times across the year, as opposed to, like, we probably sat with the luxury of people just paying the upfront amount all at once, and then as a business we receive basically all of our income, or the largest proportion of it, in one point of the year, and then we sit flush for the rest of the year. If we transition to way more people spreading their payments across the year, will that change how we then manage our overall balance of our account and how we have funds available for funding what we do across the year?
Not particularly. It's just a cash flow issue if people did that. But people could do that. You've got to remember our average rates bill is still relatively low. Sort of $200 to $300. Even people who are setting up a direct debit, they've got the option to set it up, triannually if they want. But a number still just choose to do it as a one-off. On the due date, which is completely fine. A lot of the bigger ratepayers do use the ability to spread it over 3 payments. So I think that's what we're doing currently is working fine. Whether or not we'll see more people want to spread it, entirely up to them. I mean, we can manage it from a cash flow point of view. Unlike the TAs, though, what I wouldn't want to get into was having to issue instalment notices, because that will add a significant cost, whereas it's actually working quite well at the moment that you just issue the one annual invoice, and people have the option to set it up to spread the payments if they want over the 3 DDs, as opposed to, if you went to a formal sort of quarterly type instalment process, which is what the TAs typically do, because they're looking at much bigger amounts on average.
No, look, I think that's answering my question. It was more around if more people took that opportunity, because you're setting up a direct debit anyway, even if it is your rates are $300, to spread it at a little $100 amount spread through the year over 3, they may choose to do that, but then that could have a difference for us in when we receive our income. But that's fine. That's answering the question. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Hello, thank you. Just following on from Councillor Forbes' question, and I'm just wondering, and maybe it's too hard to do, but we get all our rate statements by mail. Can you, and I know you sort of talked about it before, but is there a way to get them emailed easily that then can be click and pay?
It's not connected with the payment link. The link's information is in there, but if you can request to get your rates via email. So we've got an online form people can fill in to request that. And actually, since we send our rates notices out, we've had another 1,000 people put in requests to actually get their rates notice via email.
1,000 over compared to what?
So I mean, so 1,000 ratepayers. So out of the 120,000, another 1,000 is just without a lot of comms, but in terms of flagging it on the rates notice and things, we've had 1,000 people apply to now get their future rates via email.
So what's the total distribution?
It's still fairly tiny. I think it's only sort of around 5,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's still quite a low proportion, but if we've got any contact with ratepayers and things like that on the front of the rates notice envelope, we also have sign up for paperless. So we try and push it as much as possible. And again, it's probably a form that we're looking at just to try and make it a little bit easier to use.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go to 7.4, which is yeah, there is. Yeah. Mr. Rossler and Mr. Donnelly will report that proposed adjustments to the long-term plan for 2023. Gentlemen.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get into the detail, I'll just give some context around the report to help you with the consideration or considerations for recommendations 1 and 2, which are the guts of it, I think. As a recap, you had your 14 October workshop where you considered a presentation from staff about your adopted position in your LTP, which is the detailed estimates in year 2. Which is the basis of our annual plan. Since then, since that workshop, staff have completed the review, and the results of that review are reflected in the discussion section of the report, and the substantive recommendations 1 and 2. Importantly, I'd refer you to the options section of the report, which is paragraphs 26 and 27, and in particular 27, which is outlining, how the committee might consider and direct staff on those recommendations, being the adjustments to the LTP and the funding impacts associated with those. So just quickly looking at paragraph 27 there, there's 3 decision-making options that we're suggesting. And the first being provide draft estimates that are the same as the adopted LTP. That's for staff to provide draft estimates, the same as the LTP, which is basically no change to the LTP. Secondly, draft the annual plan based on the adjustments as presented. And the third one, instruct us to recast our review as reported. To reflect specific funding envelope and or specific adjustments based on your priorities and needs and considerations. And sort of, jumping through those decision-making options and assuming if the committee reaches a position today about the adjustments, the scale and nature and or the funding, then it can jump into recommendation 3 and which talks about, there's no significant or material changes, and then that gives staff a steer on what consultation engagement options we can bring back to you. So really I'm saying substantive discussion right now is recommendations 1 and 2, the adjustments that we're putting in front of you and the nature and scale of the funding impact of those changes. So any questions around that before I suggest we jump into the discussion section?
The questions? I'll go to Councillor Wilson first and then Councillor Calvert second.
Thank you. I had the pleasure last week of being at the Upper Lakes Rohe, and I've done some work in the Catlins with what their ambitions are as we go out and consult on the land and water plan. And it occurs to me that often we have our own plans of what we think need to be done, and yet the community may want us to be doing, support that, but want more monitoring especially. And what my concern is with this approach, or I'm just testing it, is as we go out to meet with the freshwater management units, and we may hear of things that they want to have us add in and monitor, or different spots or sites. If we do this today, this doesn't preclude us from coming back later and adding in other things, or people coming. The problem with this, if we make this decision so early on in the process, or even indicative, it actually loses the opportunity of us engaging in those communities as we go out and talk to them. Or have I got that completely wrong?
I can answer that. Mike, I can take that on. So in terms of the specific example around monitoring, we have got in our LTP, I'm sorry, I can't quite remember if it starts at the end of 23 or the beginning of 24, but we have got programmed into our LTP a review of our entire monitoring network so that it can reflect what we've heard through the land and water plan development. So that's the time where we will do the review of the entire monitoring network, and then we will obviously come back to you if we think there's necessary changes that need to be made. So you would see that happening, I'm guessing, in a 24-25 budget, if that occurred, because we'd be doing the review through 24. I'm sorry, but do you see what I'm coming on? We've got programmed in to review the entire monitoring network so that we can be sure that we have got the right network in place to evaluate the land and water plan or reflect any community aspirations that we might want to consider. That conversation will happen in probably beginning of 24, and then subsequent budget adjustments would come back to you after that.
So can I just test that? So in the Upper Lakes Rohe and in the Catlins, where in the regional policy statement we've said that we expect to have results by 2030, that's a really interesting timeline we've given ourselves if we want to start monitoring at best at that point and to show change. I mean, I just want to make sure that we're in a position to react for what the community wants necessarily, not what we think.
Yeah, firstly, we didn't give ourselves that time frame. They came through the visioning exercises that we did with the community, and they said 2030. I think at this point, it's just we don't actually know what changes are required because we haven't gone through the process. So we can't, we've got a vision, but we actually have to do the consultation process to be able to understand if it is a significant change that's required to achieve that vision. That's exactly what we're trying to do over the next 18 months through our consultation process.
Can I just sum it? So if through consultation there needs to be a change in the basis of our monitoring through the public consultation phase, we would have a trigger point then to allow that to happen in a budgetary cycle.
I'm not proposing to change our monitoring, review our entire monitoring network until 2024.
Correct.
Does that make sense? Yes.
Yep.
So that's the point that I'm triggering a review, because we will have completed, will have notified a land and water plan, and so therefore we'll understand what we have to be monitoring and evaluating.
Agreed. Thank you. Yeah.
Mrs. Gardner.
Councillor Wilson, just trying to assist, because I think while you use the example of monitoring, and we've addressed that, my sense is that the question you're really asking is what happens if we get requests for other types of funding through the process? And I guess what I'm saying to you is we have not budgeted for any kind of margin, if you like, for you to allocate funds to anything that comes up through the process. We don't normally do that. There are times when you make decisions at the end of an LTP process, and then we need to go away and figure out what that means for the increase. But we would be basically saying that, just like we have in previous years, this is what we've put forward for you. This is our best budget and work program for you at this point in time, and we haven't budgeted, for want of a better word, any kind of slush fund or whatever you would call it for anything that comes up later. That would be in addition to what's here.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. That's exactly what and certainly I don't want a slush fund. This is about us being able to go out to partners, whether they be iwi or mana whenua, or whether it be local communities, as we go through this process, understanding how the best engagement will be and the best responses. And since we've got some time frames in the RPS from those communities, understandably, it's just understanding if we do this today, and especially the resolution that talks about not consulting on, there won't be any significant changes. They may not be significant to us, but they may be very significant to communities to get more funding in. Are we closing the door on those communities coming to us?
Just to give a sense of, I guess, the sensitivity around new matters that might be introduced at this meeting, let's say, and the sensitivity of those matters on funding. Just to give you an idea, 200K to fund something new is looking like a 1% impact on a general rate. So that gives you a bit of a flavour for anything you might be sitting on in terms of an aspiration or something that the community's looking for, and how that relates to the sort of funding constraint that we're working within from the LTP year 2, which is that 18% number that you're all aware of. I hope that helps.
So Mr. Ross, can I just make a comment there, Councillor Wilson, that doesn't necessarily preclude a new initiative coming through, but what we've got to be mindful of when we do that will be the effects on current work plans and current budgets. So that will affect an increased pressure on work plans, which work plans may need to be shuffled, or it will increase expenditure, which will need it to be rated somewhere, or a program shift. So it actually doesn't preclude any of that happening.
So I don't think I've been clear, and I apologise for that, Mr. Chairman. The point I'm trying to make is that we may have a catchment group wanting to do something. They may not require any staff time. They may need funding, or they have a future plan for monitoring, or they may want to plant a few kilometres of riparian fencing. But in the third resolution, the problem is they can't come to us any other time. Normally we go out for a consultation. I'm just wondering, are we saying we're not going to consult because we're not going to add anything in? Are we going to give them a chance to add anything in as a variation on the long-term plan as they develop up their catchment projects? Because I don't want to preclude that yet. I don't, as long as, and I understand that it's going to come back to us later, potentially for a final decision.
We're not precluding that we're going to go out and talk and engage with the community at this point. No.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Deaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a general unease about the way this discussion is going. I can sympathise with the points that Councillor Wilson's bringing up, But I'm very mindful that we've had recently a 47-48% rise in general rates. Our LTP forecast that the next year would be 18%. And now, after the excellent analysis that Mike has put forward to us, it's looking as though that 18 is going to, in fact, be 20. Now, that seems to me, Mr. Chairman, to be particularly merciless. And if I was a general ratepayer, which I am, I would be spitting sparks. I'm suggesting that before we make any decision about lifting that 18%, which God knows is high enough, we have a very sharp look at the proposed expenditure. And we have another sharp look at the word no. We are not going to do more work in that area. We're going to proceed with what the LTP Year 2 said. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Deaker. Councillor Gallagher.
Yeah, look, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And having read through this, I mean, the high-level substantive question that is being asked here is about, for us, without delving into any detail, are we as councillors prepared to accept an increase on the 18% or not? And to me, it was a huge ask of the Otago ratepayers at what we asked on Year 1, and then we had indicated Year 2 and Year 3 as substantial increases before we got back to a far lesser amount. We are so early into our actual time period of achieving what we said we'd achieve for Year 1. For me, the Otago ratepayers have been very understanding of what we needed to do. And while it was hard for them to stomach 49, then followed by 18, there needs to be some prudence amongst us in our organisation and what we do moving forward to meet the 18. And I'm hopeful that it'll be less than 18 as opposed to more than 18. So my suggestion, for me, in answering this question asked of us today, so that staff have a steer, for me, I would be saying 18 is the absolute upper limit, and I am hopeful it will end up at a number less than that rather than more. Thank you.
Well said, Gary.
I'm with the gentlemen previous speakers, and probably also with Councillor Wilson at some level, I'm not sure what. We have a paper today which came from Audit and Risk because we'd been overspending our budget for the last 5 years. And the proposal really in the paper is going to be that if there's going to be, somebody's going to overspend something that they, if there's a proposal or an underspend, that we actually look at it and see what it's for and find out more about it and things. What we seem to have here is a proposal that says we are guessing that there's going to be an underspend of 320 in land and water, sort of. Mostly it's on land and water. And the staff are proposing to reprioritise that and spend even more than that. Now, that to me is, this is the time for us to actually have a think about whether we have some priorities we would like to reprioritise. I would like to start by saying maximum of what we said last year we would do, and that it would be, is likely to be a minimum where these gentlemen are coming from with a not significant change, but looking at the guesstimates about where it's going that are on page 59, and us seeing what the staff can come back and start by saying if you were stuck with, for want of a better word, what we had told people we would increase it by, what would you propose differently, knowing that we need to have something in there for what we might propose differently, because nothing in here, we know that once this is approved, then we think, well, there's nothing what we can change or nothing we want to add in or whatever. So it's all been reprioritised or sort of already by staff without us having any ability to, in the future, in the next year, do something with that. The second point to me is that transport, yep.
I just wanted to talk to the land and water piece. So you'll note that while the land and water is coming under, the regional planning is over. That's effectively, it's actually still work to deliver the land and water plan. It's just done by a different team whose budget sits in the regional planning budget. And so it's a bit artificial in that sense. It's still work that's being delivered towards a land and water plan.
So am I hearing you say that you're 100, if you look at those together, you're proposing $100,000 increase on what those things would have been with the increase of 18%?
No, well, yeah, it's not quite 100,000, but no, one's 320 and one's 265. It doesn't make 100,000.
265 and one, oh, sorry. So it's only the regional planning part of that.
Yeah, I think you'll find a lot of this is, so that's one example, but I think you'll find there's kind of some roundings and things going on as well as things move between different significant activities. Well, I can talk from my own my group area, and it's apart from the paragraph in, what paragraph is it, talk to the RPS hearings panel. Apart from that, it's cost neutral in terms of what we're proposing for the land proportion.
So
26. Sorry.
So you're sort of not saying that's not a reprioritisation by you, it's a relabelling exercise.
Yeah, that's right. It's a strategy team is doing it rather than the planning team, and so therefore it's coming up in regional planning. Yeah. So if that's not where the increase above the thing is coming from, it's not land and water, it's these other things here. And I would like to propose that we stay within that budget as a maximum of what we proposed, and look and see if there's other things that we wanted to do that weren't part of that budget from last year, that we have a look and see whether we want to have any input into those as well. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, this transport one, I'm seriously concerned that while it says it's a wee bit bigger than what we proposed, I don't think we've got yet, I can't see anywhere here that's got enough information that would tell me that we have confidence in what we might be spending on transport. So I would like more information on that before I would assume that it's going to be 2.6 thousands of increase. I just think we don't know enough about that yet. So anyway, I'm with the proposal that we should keep it within last year's without reason, and we should have a look at what might be wanting to change that, preferably getting it under that figure.
Councillor Forbes.
I'm concerned about being too worried about the increase of 18% to 20% because of the I would much prefer us to go through and decide what it is we don't want to do if we're going to try and keep the budget down. I am concerned that we will be trying to do what we're trying to do without giving the required budget for doing so. So I don't want us to stick with, no, we won't go past this, or no, we'll go past that. I want us to think about what we want done and what that costs and what we're going to leave off if we're not going to put it back. And I think that's important for us to understand. So we need more information.
Councillor Noon.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I agree with what Councillors Deaker and others have said, we went through a long-term consultation process, settled on quite a substantial rate increase, and even the forecast for year 2 is quite a substantial rate increase when you consider rate increases in general. I just want to pick up on Councillor Wilson's point about groups, catchment groups or whatever, who happen to want to progress with a project. I think the Otago Regional Council provides through the Eco Fund an opportunity. That's one place as an opportunity for funding midstream or during a financial year, and the other opportunities with central government, and there's plenty of examples of where catchment groups have been able to tap into Jobs for Nature funding, that type of thing. So I feel comfortable that we stick to our guns and focus on what we've already adopted for year 2, being an 18% rate increase.
Further questions? Oh, sorry, Ryan. I did have you written down. Just push the button tap.
Okay. Yeah, it seems as if I wonder whether we're sort of getting a second bite of the cherry. We've been through this process. Just looking at the table, one of the significant changes, as far as I can tell, impact on targeted rates not funded, is $500,000 for civil defence emergency management. Yeah, is that fair, Mike? It's a key one. And another one is the impact on the general rate. And I'm just trying to understand that, and I'm trying to correlate it with what Gwyneth just said, because the land and water is down at 319,000. And obviously things are going on. Is this something that could be considered through our upcoming annual plan process, and maybe we can find savings to go with to balance these additional costs? That's a question. It's just that, I personally would like, we've been through the long-term process, we've been through the annual plan process, so I'm surprised to see this $500,000 on civil defence. Were we aware of that through our last process in terms of cost implications? What was our understanding?
No, this is new, and this is on the back of the review of civil defence that was done and some restructuring, because we recognised we didn't have a fit-for-purpose structure for day-to-day for civil defence. Remembering that, of course, we rate for civil defence on behalf of TAs, etc. So we collect for everybody in terms of regional civil defence. I think it's fair to say that we have been very conscious in putting this together of the need to stay as close to the 18% as possible. We're also don't necessarily have any issue with sticking to the 18%. It might be, though, that we reprioritise, and I think that's what Councillor Forbes was saying. What are the things that we wouldn't do? And I guess my difficulty with that is, in some ways, yes, we have to come up with a figure for the annual plan, but at the same time, we still have the things that come up during the year that we have to be disciplined around as well, or otherwise we will overspend. It just depends on what that looks like. So I guess what I'm saying is we can work within the 18%. That's certainly the conversation we've had around the ELT table, but we would come back to you, I would imagine, with a bit of a rejig of the work program to say, look, well, there are some things that we just would not do, or we would push further out, rather than do them as planned. So that's really where the room for compromise is.
Yeah, so through the chair, so something like civil defence, like governance came up with a list of priorities, you know, water at the head, water quality, this type of thing at the head. But civil defence just seems to be, you know, take it or leave it type of thing. It comes in restructuring, additional staff. I mean, it's not on our list of priorities. It's an obligation. So how do we balance that issue?
Well, I think that's the difficulty, and really that's in the past what we've done is we've brought to you a list that's been divided up between the must-dos, the things we have to do, those obligations, as opposed to the things that we don't necessarily have to do, but there is an appetite for. And in terms of civil defence, it is an obligation. We have to undertake that. We have to be sufficiently prepared for the region, and having done a review, we feel that this is the best, the best method and resourcing that would be available for the function to manage the risk that we manage in Otago. And we know that, you know, civil defence has been called on many times in the last few years. So we do have to be prepared, and there's planning within that. There are other things that we might want to have a different conversation about. We saw commentary with decisions that were made around the annual plan around air. And again, I think, given that we're seeing reform of the RMA, etc., the question there is, well, do we run ahead with proposals to do an air plan and a coast plan and those things, or do you risk manage that and perhaps not run ahead, given that you've got reform coming and we know that things will change? So, you know, there are strategic questions, difficult questions that we could ask ourselves, none of which necessarily are the perfect answer. So, you know, we'd be more than happy to go away and, you know, if you tell us it's 18%, it's 18%, and then we would come back with how we think, you know, we can deliver the best for Otago within that 18%, balancing our obligations against those things that are perhaps nicer to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gowden, for that explanation. Very enlightening. Was someone...
Just on that, I mean, that would be our job, wouldn't it, to work out what the priorities were. So rather than leave it to staff. So that's the whole sort of point of the annual plan process, that you've got options and then we work out.
I think if I hear Mrs. Gardner correctly, that staff will go and, based on our priorities, come back with a prioritised work plan for us to look at and then make that decision.
Based on the strategic direction.
Just so long as that final decision, you know, the options there are ours to make. I wouldn't like to think the staff would hear off into a direction that we might have to pull them back on.
But we have given them our strategic direction that we're heading, and I'm sure that they will apply that to their methodology. Councillor Calvert.
I would like to
Microphone.
Sorry, I would like to move the proposal of leaving it the rates where they are and the staff bringing back to us options. And I would also like to have, if we could, when that happens, be brought back what has changed in staff thinking and understanding since the LTP. Because if there's a proposal or an option, I'd like to know why it wasn't, what was different from it a year ago, and particularly including transport, what assumptions are being made. Anyway, the resolution I would like to move is that, or the set of resolutions, is to endorse the what's in the long-term plan, so no adjustments to the long-term plan, endorse year 2 of the long-term plan, and ask that the staff bring back to us options for how to achieve that, and where we might, what choices we would have. Yep. Yes, it's going to replace 1, 2.
So what I have, councillor, that you're moving to endorse what is in the LTP.
Yes, the current long-term plan
endorse
proposal for year 2.
year 2 of the LTP and ask staff to bring back options on how to achieve and what choices may be available.
Oh, sorry, yes. Bring back a report on options for achieving same. In particular, any assumptions made which would affect that the proposals.
Like me to put this up on.
That would be lovely.
Yes, that would be lovely. And agree that this proposal does not represent a significant or material change. Would not affect, I suppose, would be the.
Yep.
As assessed against our significance and engagement policy.
I'm sorry, go.
Sorry, that's number 3. So just tying it back into the first one, agrees that this proposal does not represent a significant or material change as assessed against the Otago Regional Council significance and engagement policy. And number 4 can stay in.
First one is just first one would be
the year 2, the proposed year 2 long-term plan. What is it? Yes, just the provisions of the year 2 long-term plan.
okay. So I've got that shared. So I've got a 1, got a 2.
And number 3 can stay in.
Number 3 is the one that
Number 3 is number 4. Sorry, that's number 4.
Number 4.
I just asked staff to have a good look at that, especially number 1, that they are confident that we have all got
and
the
the basis for completing the,
yeah, certainly.
Thank you. Just in relation to number 1, could we maybe, I just don't want us to get tied up in knots. I'm just thinking, endorse the proposed year 2 of the LTP. We're not really doing that because what you're asking us to do is to go away and, in consideration of priorities, have a think about it. So could we just put the 18% rather than
the
year 2?
Proposed 18% increase.
I think it might just be a bit of a better way of saying
I would have
Comfortable?
My apologies. I would have been able to, had the options provided us with alternatives for resolutions, we would get a better answer to some of those. If you know that it's an option we might take, we then wouldn't have to flounder around at a meeting. So my apologies for the floundering, but just suggesting a way forward for next time.
Comfortable?
I think that would be council.
Yeah, is that?
Yeah, and it goes back to Sarah's previous point around you're not looking at any material significant change to the work program, which is the counter to the funding part of it.
Yes.
And that's implicit in that suite of recommendations. So, and that, that directs staff quite clearly not to bring anything other than what you're seeing in this report. I mean, there's five level of service issues in front of you, work program issues in front of you in this paper, including, as Brian pointed out, the civil defence one, and then the 4 under clause 16. And then, as Sarah's pointing out, we can go and have a look at those and potentially other things. But within that, there's no significant or material change to that LTP, which I think was the intent of your first wording of that recommendation 1.
Yes.
So that's important, and that's what one of the purposes of this meeting was to actually, from the committee, see is there anything else that you're sitting on as elected members that sits outside of the LTP and that you want to bring to this formal meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, and it may or may not have had funding implications.
Yes. So yeah. So are you?
When are we doing that?
Happy with our wording? Bearing in mind that you're.
Yep. I mean.
Councillor Robertson.
CEO.
Just checking, it's probably me, but I'm not entirely sure. Does it mean do exactly what's in the LTP in terms of projects, or does it mean have a think about some of these things like civil defence, which definitely will require funding, and adjust the LTP to ensure that some of them could be done? I'm not sure exactly, but that's probably just me.
Would you like to comment on that, Mrs. Gardner?
I understand the latter of the two options that you gave. So what I understand the case to be is that you're saying we want the rate increase to be at 18%. We understand that there's not going to be a significant or material change to the work program. However, at the same time, we're asking you to look at the priorities you've given us through the strategic direction and the LTP, and how we might make some adjustment to provide for those. And that may mean that there are some things that we don't do or we take out and substitute for something else. Now, Councillor Laws, if I may, Councillor Laws just commented to me that he wondered about when the time is for when you come forward with the things that you want to have considered for the LTP. And I guess my understanding is that that's kind of not going to happen based on this resolution. So what I'm asking you, please, is to be clear for us about that. I'm not saying whether it can happen or it can't happen. I'm just saying, just if you could give us clarity, because we'll need to factor that in terms of the number and level of discussion that we have with you moving forward.
Councillor Laws and then Councillor Calvert.
They're not mutually exclusive. To answer Mrs. Gardner's point, you can argue for a target of 18%, but you could suggest that there were new things that you wanted to add to your new work program. For example, I am a strong believer, you know my views on rabbits, and that we're not doing enough, and that we need to be much more proactive in that space. That may require more funding in year 2 of the program. I'm sure it will. from my point of view anyhow. So the question is, I guess, to answer the question of staff would be, if you are going to add new stuff to the program, what are the things that you would then reprioritise as a consequence? So, so I guess that's what I mean in terms of this motion. So the aspirational, sorry to use that word, target is 18%, but we don't know we're going to get to through our deliberations next year. And there may be things that we consider to have on the balance of probabilities a higher priority. That's all I'm saying. Is that fair? Yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Calvert and Councillor Deaker, I'm aware that you've got your hand up. I won't be attacked.
Two things sort of in response to Councillor Laws. One of them is that the recommendations we have in front of us didn't allow for us to have any input either to add things.
So we've got now.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that this is a replacement for what we had that we still didn't, I mean, you know. The other thing is I'd like to change, in response to that, I'd like to change this just slightly, this resolution saying endorse a maximum increase, because that allows us to start from a slightly lower increase and change that the priorities in the last couple of percent if that's what we might want to do. So just yeah. Are you, Councillor Hope, happy with that?
I'm happy that it's kept.
Just because that sort of gives a flavour for if somebody comes in and says that they would, during deliberations and things, we might end up having knocked some back, putting some different ones in and allowing us to have another wee think, especially having listened to people.
Councillor Deaker.
Yeah, I've been waiting for quite a while to say exactly what Hilary has just said. Maximum in front of 18%. Thank you.
Your wish is taken on board, sir, and has been done. Thank you.
Of course.
And Councillor Forbes.
I'm really concerned with that word maximum. We are completely circumventing a process that's down for next year. We've been delivered that, you know, it's going to be a real challenge to keep it where we want to go. I agree with Michael Laws that the pest control program may well require more money spent now, which will be cheaper later. There's other things we've talked about around water and around science and things that I don't want to be held to that at early next year when we start to really get into this. I think that's really bad. That's my view.
We have moved into debate, but Councillor Kelleher, and I know I didn't signal that we had done, but I allowed that.
Apologies.
You knew I'd done that. Thank you.
I thought we were well beyond the questions, frankly.
And
Gary,
to me, in any business, there needs to be an upper limit. Otherwise, we as councillors are really saying there can be a bottomless pit of funding available from the ratepayers to do everything that central government deems of us, that ORC staff deem of us, and that councillors deem are necessary. But in any business, there needs to be some upper limits that we work to. And I think we as councillors, speaking for our ratepayers, have accepted the work programs and issues and the best forward predictions that we had at the time as being what we would do, and we put that big call out to the ratepayers and they accepted it. So I, for one, am not prepared to have an ever-increasing upper limit on these increases year by year, because remember, this is 18% on top of the increase that we predicted last time. So it's not 18% from the previous amount, it's 18% on top of about 100 and something mil now. So, and then we've got another increase on top of that. Within our work plan, if we have new projects, we will be able to bring them. If we want to spend more on rabbits, or if we want to spend more on air or other water-related issues, we can bring that and say to staff, what can we do to reprioritise if these projects become more critical than what we currently have? there will be the must-to-dos and there will be the ones that we have some flexibility around, and that flexibility might be that we can put it out for another year or that we have some underspend. And we are seeing in the early predictions some underspend anyway on some of our projects that may be caught up or maybe not. We are very early into these increases. So I think prudence is definitely needed here, and I think we as councillors have to set some upper limits that we will work to. Thank you.
Any further debate before I put the recommendation? Councillor Robertson.
That was the question I was going to ask too.
Yeah. Or because it makes a big difference.
We can't hear the question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Maximum 18% increase in what? Is it general rate or is it total rate? Because it makes a big difference to the discussion that's just been held about things that are often attract a targeted rate. Thanks.
It's be total rate.
Yeah.
The 18% is total rate. It just so happens that in year 2, it's 18% basically for both.
Yeah.
But when we were talking about the 18% we're talking about is the same as the 48% for year 1. That was total rates.
Yep.
So it does make a difference because you could look at 18% and you have a big switch between general and targeted. But the way that it is in year 2, it's basically 18% for general and targeted as well as total. So what I'd take this to mean is we want to stay within basically those parameters. You know, we don't want to see general jumping to 36 and targeted going to 0 or vice versa.
Comfortable? Any further discussion? Look, I'm very comfortable with the direction that we're giving staff, and I'm very comfortable that they will come back to us telling us what needs to be changed, what needs to be adjusted to ensure that we are within those parameters. It will require prioritisation, but we have given our strategic direction. I'm comfortable that staff will stick to that strategic direction because that's where we are heading. So I look forward to the work that they will do with due prudence and due veracity to make sure we get to what we've desired there. So we have 3. I think I'll take the 3 as one. From moved by Councillor Calvert, seconded by Councillor Hope. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Would you like that noted, Councillor Forbes? That's not required to be noted. Carried. Thank you, Mr. Rossler. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Thank you, staff, for your help through that process. I'm just flicking now. Finance Committee, Mr. Donnelly on his own. 7.5. 2022-23 rating considerations.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this paper is bringing this back formally to the committee because we've got 2 resolutions that came out of the LTP deliberations. One was that we would report back around the options for flood and drainage rating reviews, and the other one was around a region-wide methodology for water improvement. The first one didn't actually stipulate that would lead in, it had to be done for the annual plan, but the second one did say that we'd look at that for inclusion in the annual plan. So we thought it was time, prudent to bring them both back now so that we can make sure that council can make a decision and we're clear about where we're going with these in relation to the annual plan or not. We did on both of these do a workshop. I'm trying to think, was it about a month ago, about a month ago, on both of these, just to obviously bring up some of the history around these things and some of the more detail around these. So we've already been through some of this. So now what we've done is summarised a bit of that information and come up with a recommendation on how to approach both of these. You'll see from looking at the resolution on the flood and drainage rating reviews, it's got quite a few parts to it. It does say that we'd be looking at independent reviews of all schemes, and the resolution wanted us to come back with options around doing that and outline what the cost might be. Really, the options around doing that depend on exactly what level of detail and what the scope of those reviews would be. We outlined what rating reviews entail in the workshop, and we've outlined here, depending on the level of detail, the costs could vary. We've then done some, very high level analysis based on previous rating reviews that have been done, and then extrapolated that out to come up with a number. And as you can see, if we were to do exactly what that resolution says of have independent, which I take that to mean hiring external consultants, and reviewing all flood and drainage schemes, I think the cost will be a significant number. Now, whether or not there's other options around doing that differently, consolidating, whatever, could potentially be looked at. But as it stands, we'd need to get a steer on, is that where council wants to go? As I've pointed out at this point, and the recommendation on that, would prefer to continue to do more analysis on those flood and drainage schemes, not just the rates, on the costs as well, and that flows into work that is programmed in around the scheme performance reviews as well. So really, we're saying at this point, we acknowledge the resolution, but we'd like to spend, certainly the next calendar year working through more analysis and looking at those costs and rating of those schemes through that period. On the water improvement funding, again, the same thing, that we think that there's more work to be done there. We did clarify in the workshop that the resolution was around a region-wide methodology. My view is that by having it funded within each district, we do have a region-wide methodology. We don't have a region-wide rate, and at this point, we'd propose that we don't rush into changing anything for that for the annual plan, and again look at that with a view to doing more work on our rates leading into the next LTP. So that's basically what the recommendation is proposing, that we continue working on both of these issues through the next period, and we'd be looking to, once we've done that analysis, looking to make any ratings changes leading into the next LTP.
Question, Councillor Wilson.
Kia ora, thank you. I understand the amount of work involved in these things, and I didn't move the motion or participate in the motions lightly to do this. But deferring something for essentially 3 years, I don't think is fair on the submissions that I found compelling. And my problem, especially in the flood and drainage schemes on the Tairi, and maybe we should have put them up as the first one, is that I have real concerns about the sustainability, especially as we do a performance review. So the question I have is, in that context, Mr. Donnelly, is it possible for you to sit down with the chairs of finance to look at a simplified review that can just test some overarching principles like sustainability, like is it fair and equitable, or is it similar to, do we do these things similarly to other schemes, and come back even for just the Tairi drainage and flood schemes to be checked?
Can I do that simply and easily? No. And that's why I'm proposing that I need the time to look at that, over a longer period next year. It's not a simple just sit down and do that in a short period. You mentioned where you say look at other schemes. Are you talking about other flood and drainage schemes across other regional councils?
No,
and how they're rated?
No, I'm talking about consistency of the rating methodology in Otago.
Yeah, and so in Otago, you can see some of that I touch on in the paper, how there are some differences. Again, I'd need to do some more analysis. It's interesting that you say that the submissions were compelling to change this. Quite frankly, we hear that every LTP very loudly and every annual plan year from the same small handful of people. So I don't. People are always going to have a view that their rates are too high and they shouldn't pay. I think that with a lot of these things, as you can see, I've outlined in the paper, we have done numerous reviews on the Taieri in particular because of concerns that have been raised, and it's all we get is they just keep coming back year after year, and they'll want us to do more. Now, we're proposing to have a look. The other thing that you mention is sustainability. That's actually not a rating issue. That's a scheme performance issue and a budgeting issue. So rating is about who's going to pay. Where you're talking about sustainability, that's more about the overall cost of providing that service. My view on the rating is we've already done the benefit reviews and we've done the public-private benefit review. So we've determined who benefits and who should pay. Then it comes down to how much is the cost. And if it's not sustainable, that's a cost issue. When you get into the if you want to then undo the whole principle of it's whoever benefits shouldn't pay, then we're getting into that's a review, a first principles review of council's entire rating system, because you'll then be saying, in this particular case, we've identified, we've done all the analysis, we know who benefits, and you're saying they're not going to pay, other people are. And that I think is something that cannot be rushed if you're going to move into that sort of review territory.
Councillor Laws, Scott, then Calvert.
However, you've extrapolated that view into Lake Hayes later on in the report. Now, my understanding was, Nick, I'm surprised this is here. You're trying to relitigate a governance decision. We clearly made this decision, and it was unfair the way you've characterised this in this report as we don't understand, staff don't understand the decision. I remember a very good discussion, I think it was in Queenstown, around this issue, and governance clearly stated why it came to the decision that it did, which was that Lake Hayes was a regional asset, and therefore we were going to extrapolate it. There was a second corollary of that, which was that we will be going to areas like Tomahawk or other areas as well, that if we actually apply the Castalia process, they're simply not going to be able to afford the cleanup. And that this was a way of moving around the region and saying, where are our degraded and damaged waterways, in particular lakes and areas? How can we clean them up? And as a general view, we're restoring them as a regional asset that the whole region can enjoy. Now, I reject utterly, and so did governance at long-term plan, the Castalia analysis and assessment. So when we come to Lake Hayes, the reason that we got to that decision and we said it should be spread regionally and not on the sort of Castalian typical, cost accounting basis, which has got no vision and no consequence of region, and just what you expect the cost accountant to do, really, we came to this conclusion. Now, that's the reason we came to it. We don't need to analyse it again. And I thought we made that very, very clear during our long-term plan deliberations. Going forward, it would mean it's different than drainage. That's a different issue. Lake Hayes is different again. It's a regional asset. It belongs to the region. just like Tomahawk Lagoon does and Lake Waihola and those sorts of areas. So I'm just saying to you, I'm really surprised to see this back here.
Yep. That's not what this paper's saying at all. So what the bit that I say that that I didn't understand was the bit around in the consultation document. There was the proposal, the options that went in were the option around a uniform regional rate.
Yes, right.
Yeah. I still didn't understand why that went into the consultation document. Yeah. What this is actually saying is, I'm not actually going back to saying, this isn't saying go back to doing what Castalia said. It's actually saying just stick with the status quo that governance decided, which is to fund Lake Hayes via the river and water management rate, which is currently how it is. What we got asked to do in the resolution was to look at a region-wide methodology. I've actually had a look at this and gone, we had the Castalia one, governance said they didn't want that for the reasons you've stated, yeah? So, and did decide on using the river and water management rate, yeah? So basically each activity will be funded on a district by district basis, yeah? So Lake Hayes is being funded via Wakatipu and Wanaka river and waterway management rates. Tomahawk will get funded via the Dunedin one. So I've then said effectively that is a region-wide methodology. Each district is going to fund its own initiatives.
It's not a region-wide, I'm sorry.
Well, this is the thing is, just to be clear, yep. We did a workshop because I was under the impression that what the resolution was asking for was some sort of regional rate. I then got a clear message from the workshop, no, that's not what it was asking for. And in fact,
listen, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But in actual fact, my understanding was it was going to be regional, not based upon district river and drainage.
Well, this isn't what we've got. What we've currently got at the moment is not based on, it's got nothing to do with flood and drainage. It's just each district, and Queenstown is split into two, but for the purposes of this, we've joined them back up. Each district has its own targeted rate for river and waterway management. And so we're funding these sort of activities out of each district's rate. So it's a way of rating it where that activity is still sitting. You've got to remember the message or the feedback that I saw come through from the LTP was that people, particularly further away, the likes of Dunedin, they were not comfortable with proposal option 3 and them funding it. And in fact, option 3 would, if that sort of uniform regional rate had have gone through, Dunedin would have paid almost half of remediating Lake Hayes. And in fact, Dunedin would have paid either slightly more or slightly less, around about double what QLDC was paying, which is, I don't think that was fully understood by people.
But you've got so few submissions to the regional, to the long-term plan to start with, to try and characterise it as Dunedin thinks is wrong. I mean, that's the whole, it is a regional asset. It's a regional asset and we should be funding it regionally. And that's what I'm expecting. That's what I expected to come out of our discussion of the long-term plan.
Councillor Scott.
This is actually an important discussion. And I do have some sympathy with both arguments. I actually voted for option 2 in the end, which I think is typically $9 average rate in the Queenstown. Insofar as I've always had some frustration when it's taken.
Microphone.
Had some frustration, and I think some of it, is technical issues, and some of it's actually financial. That with Lake Hayes, we have to convince the local people to pay for it. And they had a similar situation, for example, in Clutha District, when they had their sewage schemes. They went around each individual sewage scheme. They had to convince Ben Hard to pay for all this money, but it was actually when they made it regional, they could actually step back and say, we all want a certain standard, let's agree a plan over time, pay for it, and let's do it.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not really in the camp of saying, Lake Hayes is a regional lake, etc. But I am in the camp that actually we need a regional and Otago strategy on all our waterways and may be funded by all of Otago, and we need to get on with it. Yes. Now, I accept Nick's point that, half of the Lake Hayes on the option 3 would be paid by Dunedin. But that's not so bad if you're also paying for the waterways around Dunedin, your Tomahawks and your estuaries that are not that far away, Upper Wakawiti and to the south, and we actually get on with it. Whereas we get, it's a real piecemeal. I would like to see us actually transition from option 2 to option 3 over time. That's my gut feel. And my question really is when will we have a water strategy to be aligned with it? So, at the moment we're focusing on Tuatapere, Lake Hayes, Tomahawk, but when are we going to start knocking off all the estuaries
in
the FMU process? And then we actually say no longer will it be step-by-step financial as an impediment, we'll fund them regionally. So I would prefer that Nick was actually saying, we'll stick with option 2, but we're going to go to option 3 when the FMU process was supporting it. What do you think? There's my question, Hilary, to our CE.
So just to help you with that, you remember that one of the things we did sort of in the last minute was to bring some LTP funding forward for integrated catchment planning. ELT met this week and had a full conversation with the staff who have been putting that program together. It's our intent that we bring that to you, I think, in the new year. Is that right, Gavin?
A briefing update on the 8th of December.
Right, thank you, in December. So you get a picture for where we're heading. It is built inside of the FMU framework, but it could be by, narrower than that, sub-catchments or whatever the case may be. And it's built off the very early workshop conversations where you might remember Councillor Robertson drew on the whiteboard a diagram for us. So coming in December for the first conversation.
Yeah, so what's your take then on the financial? I mean, the financials should follow the strategy, but what's your take? What do you think about the idea of getting a strategy, a regional strategy, and transitioning from option 2 to option 3?
Well, I think what Nick is really recommending. Sorry, I just want to find the right page.
It is basically that.
It's basically that.
It's basically that.
Yeah. So, we line it up so that you can make a decision when you've got a holistic picture.
Yeah. So because both of those in the recommendation saying don't do anything right now for the annual plan. So in the case of the water quality is that it would stay funded via the river and water management rate.
Yeah.
But as I say in point 3, note that both of those rating matters will continue to be worked on as part of a wider review of rates. I think in the case of the water quality, it will vary. A lot of that will be driven on what will the wider plan be as we develop that, and then that'll naturally probably lead to the discussion of is the river and water management rate the right way to continue funding that going forward.
Yeah,
I can see your point that you go. Yeah, at the moment, I think when you haven't got a region-wide program and you're being driven by people in certain districts or areas, I think it's hard to sort of justify that, as I pointed out, areas when you've got a significant spend, because the spend in Lake Hayes is significantly different to the spend in Tomahawk.
Yeah.
Yet what we would have is, you know, our biggest ratepayer, when we've showed you who pays all the rates across the whole region, the DCC is our biggest ratepayer. So the DCC, not the Dunedin area, but the actual council itself would be the biggest funder of remediating Lake Hayes. I think we need to understand those sort of implications a bit more before we.
How's that relevant?
Well, because are they asking for that work to be done?
Who cares? I mean, the reality is it's a regional asset. Why can't we get this through? Yeah, so what? Yes, that's right. So if you're going to remediate a regional asset.
I'm just going to go back to Councillor Scott. Are you comfortable with the way forward that we're...
Well, I've actually found that helpful, but where I get a bit frustrated is that we'll end up voting on option 2 and we'll forget about option 3. Whereas I'd prefer to see in these reports actually, you know, in the future or maybe in 2 years' time, you know, some type of concrete process to get there.
So can I just add to that? So as governors, Councillor Scott, that's 3 is the one that we need to keep a tab on to make sure 3 is happening.
Well, but with the water with the water
100%.
FMU.
Yep.
So I'm happy. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Councillor Calvert.
Mine is, I think, a question for Nick around this. There's 2 things we asked to be done earlier. Clearly, A and B and 2 on page 64. Clearly, B is not a goer at this point. What I would like to know is, I mean, it's not a goer, but it's just not a goer right now before we develop this next year's annual plan by the look of it. Would it work for you if we laid this paper on the table with a view to looking at what timing that B could happen in, and looking at, for example, the possibility of just starting with the Tyree schemes and getting in amongst them. So laying it on the table while we think a wee bit more about where this whole thing's going, because it's got sort of a bit confused. I don't think it's something we can decide today easily, but Are you talking
about Tyree or water quality?
Well, there's 2 different things going on here, and what I'm saying is that the one of them is, I think Nick's suggesting that we look at it in long term for the long-term plan in 3 years' time, and one of them was reviewing the flood protection schemes and things. So there's 2 separate things going on, but they're interlinked and they're quite confusing to move forward on. If we laid this on the table and then thought of them as those 2 things and made a timing decision likely about one next time we meet or whatever, and look at whether we can, now that we've heard from you that it would be a very expensive exercise to do something that we may have already done part of, that we look and see whether we come back and say we just want the Tyree scheme to be the starting point and see what we think we need for that. Would that be a way forward that would work?
It depends on if you're going to leave it lying on the table and then you want me to come back. What exactly do you want me to come back with? Because I'm still no better informed as to, apart from the fact that you're now narrowing it down, say in the flood and drainage one, to just tell us about the Tyree. I don't know what you want me to tell you, because quite frankly, my view on the Tyree would be, we've looked at that. I don't get what the deal is with a rating review requirement, other than some people don't like what they're paying. Now, we can go through and look at the overall amount that scheme is costing, but I don't get what doing another review of who benefits and how we divvy it up. I think the problem there is more around how much is that scheme costing, and is it sustainable going forward for council to have a scheme? It's a bit of a different question, and that's what wanted to get more into next year, but that's going to take a little bit of time because we need to look at some of the spend history. We need to tie it in with the performance reviews that are planned.
Yes, I don't think it's about the so much who benefits and things. I think it's about people thinking it may just not be worth doing at all. You know, it's not whether I benefit more than my neighbour or 10 times as much if I'm paying 10 times as much. I don't even want it, perhaps. So it's at that level. It's people saying, I'm not even sure that I want to protect if that's the cost of it, I don't even want it. I don't want to be part of it. So that's different from saying I'm paying more than my share. So I think what we need to do is if we have, and you've properly pointed out, if we want to review, what on earth is it we actually want to review and where? And so I'm just saying we might be able to clarify what we might want if we start with, say, the Taieri, because it's not the overall thing that the other region-wide methodology thing is all about. I mean, they're not really related in a sense, are they? But
can I just a comment on that? If we go to number 5, what is currently happening is staff propose undertaking further analysis of these scheme rates and the underlying cost of the schemes in conjunction with a scheme performance review. So I'd probably need to ask Dr. Palmer that as part of the scheme rates and underlying cost of the scheme and its review, will you be actually referring back to the Castalia report and the likes and to ensure that we have correctly apportioned the benefits, that the benefits are appropriately proportioned, and I suppose that's what it is, that the benefits are appropriately apportioned.
Mr. Chairman, unlikely to go back to the Castalia report because that was looking at the apportionment between private and public. What would likely come out of this would be looking at the relative benefits within the scheme, and we've broken it into different benefit areas. It would look at, say, whether those boundaries should be changed perhaps, or maybe the ratios of benefit between different geographic areas.
Was the Castalia report done in when for the drainage schemes?
16.
Sorry, I can't recall, Mr. Chairman.
I don't recall it since I've been elected, so it must have been before October 2016. Is that right?
It's one in 2011, one in 2016, I thought.
Yeah, it was 2016. I can't remember if it was before or after October. Yeah, I think it was completed before October. Yeah.
We haven't seen it. No. Didn't think so.
So we have any further questions?
Sorry, then I'd like to propose 2 resolutions. And I don't know whether it's 2 resolutions so much as we have resolutions that were to be carried out. And I don't know whether what I'm proposing effectively is an amendment to resolutions we've previously made. I don't know technically what. Help me out here, Councillor Laws.
Well, I mean, I'm actually, there's another one coming on. There's a number 4 to do with Lake Hay.
Yes, I'm just saying it. Do we need to? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Councillor Robertson, I'd like to resolve to rescind A and B and replace A with one of the Taieri schemes. Terms of reference to be
sustainability.
Sorted out between, as it were, to be set out by people.
Just second, we adjournment here.
Yeah.
I think we need to, and then we'll just actually discuss exactly what we're trying to head to with this resolution, rather than propose one on as we go. If we could just log off, keep our 2 councillors on board, and we just have a wee discussion as to exactly what you're trying to achieve.
1 second, please.
And I'll also note that
being 12:30 with a council meeting at 1 o'clock due to kick off, at the conclusion of this item, we will adjourn and we may even come back and adjourn and finish this item at the conclusion. If we haven't sorted between ourselves in the next few minutes, if we haven't sorted the way forward, we will adjourn to the conclusion of the council meeting.
And we haven't reached debate yet.
Yeah, no,
100%. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Can I suggest another course of action that doesn't put us into that kind of time pressure? And frankly, that is nothing wrong with your adjournment idea at all, but that we actually can adjourn this to sometime tomorrow or to our next council round, which is in 2 weeks, this particular item. So that you could reconvene the Finance Committee in 2 weeks' time. And by that time, that discussion will be held and our council officers be much better informed. But if you're going to put us into this sort of time pressure, we'll make a bad decision.
I'm definitely not going to put you under time pressure. What I'm saying is this is exactly what I want to hear now. And that's probably a line. I'm very comfortable with that line.
Yeah.
I'll just refer to Mrs. Gardner if she's comfortable with that sort of time frame with the other workloads that we've got on.
It won't take long once we've had.
No, it's.
Well, I think you have to be careful about doing too much behind closed doors because you've got paper before you. The other thing I would say is my slight concern about where Councillor Calvert was taking the resolution goes really back to my email to you yesterday in terms of the things that need to be considered. So my question would be, why would you be plucking the Tyree out as a scheme to do something on, and what is the basis for that? Because you haven't had advice that would be more urgent than anything else. And so I think I just refer you back to that advice to consider that. So I don't have any discomfort necessarily, except to say it needs to be transparent. So, yes, by all means have a conversation, but you must make sure that you have a proper debate and conversation when you come back on the matter. And probably need advice if you go down the line of it's the Tyree over anywhere else.
Microphone, please, Amanda. Sorry. Or just throw things at us.
Sorry. That was not my intention. If you're proposing to revoke a motion, if that was what you're meaning by rescind the motion, then there's processes under standing orders where there needs to be notice, and that is a process in itself. So it's not something you'd be able to do on the fly, from what I understand of standing orders.
Only that Nick was suggesting that he didn't carry it out, so I just thought, what's the way through this?
But were you talking about rescinding the motions made in the annual plan process, or were you proposing not to take the recommendations?
Not to carry out what we had resolved.
Carry this
I was trying to find a way through that, what we do with
to the next appropriate meeting to be decided by the chair of finance and the CE.
I know what the right thing is.
Yeah, no, it
Does that
doesn't
make sense?
But you weren't proposing to revoke the annual plan
And
motions.
the remainder of the agenda.
I don't know what.
My view on it was that we weren't rescinding the LTP motion because it was to develop one, and I'm saying that using what we've got is a region-wide methodology. So
No, but it's for the 21-22.
schemes resolution was just to, this is the LTP resolutions, was just to report back by Christmas on options and cost. And so this paper's closed that one out.
Yeah. So look, can I propose to councillors that we will go back, we will reconvene the meeting. We will, the concept that will be to lay this, to carry this paper forward to the next available meeting to be arranged between the Chair of Finance and the CE, the Chairs of Finance and the CE. The remainder of today's agenda will be concluded at the end of the council meeting today. So there was 2 further items that we need to do.
Seconded.
No, we're not public yet. I'm just saying that's where we've got to.
We're not non-public either, we're adjourned.
No, we're adjourned. So we'll now, we're comfortable. let's re-adjourn the meeting. Thank you for your conversation. Thank you for your support.